Hello, and welcome to the Dark Hours. I'm John Nathan, and if you'll permit me, I'd like to be your personal storyteller in all things delightfully dark, terrifically terrifying, and fantastically frightening. So, if you're an avid fan of horror and horror sci fi, and if you are ready to have the best time of your life being scared, you have certainly found the right place. The dark hours are between midnight and 4 a.m. That's 4 stories per season, and we will be uploading 1 story per week. I would like for you to think of this channel as your own private escape from the true horrors, the horrors of reality. I want you, my hopefully someday soon loyal listener, to take my world and make it your own. The story I've chosen to tell you first is one all of us drivers have had to deal with at least once in our lives. There's always a dark back road we find ourselves on eventually, and there always seems to be an innocuous patch or two where road workers have had to fill in a nasty pothole. We don't think anything of them, we merely drive over them and keep going. They don't even cross our minds. But what if we were to drive over something that is not patchwork, but something else altogether different? Something malevolent, something alive. Unfortunately, two twin brothers have the unfortuitous fate of crossing over something altogether different, a thing not even from this earth. And the small town of Elks Grove, Kentucky is apt to vanish. Its denizens, that is. The town itself will be on the verge of becoming a ghost town, which many people will visit to throw in their theories of what might have happened. That is, unless someone can stop this evil entity before it gorges itself until full, where it will venture on to a new town. And it won't take long before it will have entered your own town, my hopefully someday soon loyal listener. I've entitled this roadside rendezvous with death, The Dark Spot, 12 a.m. A man sat alone in the living room of his 2 story house. He was seated in his lazy boy recliner, staring with vacuous, blank eyes at a blank television screen. Gently rocking, he stared at his reflection. His brown hair was disheveled, and his pallor was almost gray. Not that he could see these physical attributes in the dim reflection of the TV screen, but he knew what he looked like. Had someone walked in on him, they would probably have taken him for dead, except for the recliner and its slow rocking. It had only been 10 minutes since he'd chopped his wife's head off and mutilated his 2 little girls. The axe he had used to do so was propped against him, its bloodied blade on the carpeted floor where its handle continued up at a slant, causing the top of the handle to rest against his large right hand. And it wasn't just the axe that showed signs of the carnage that took place. He himself looked as if he had just stepped out of an abattoir. It was like someone had wound up a berserker, handed it an axe, then set it free in that house. Chunks of gore hung from his shirt, his pants. Even his hands were stained with the blood he had shed. And it was not just the axe that was a testimony to the butchery that had taken place. There was a sickly, smeared trail of gore that led across the living room floor and up the carpeted risers of the staircase. It almost looked as if someone had taken very dark strawberry jam and smeared it about 6 inches wide and continued to do so up the stairs and down to the end of the hall where the man and his late wife's room was located. There was also an area where the blood trail curved off to the left and into the girl's room. The gory path was made by the blade being dragged along the floor, as though he lacked the ability to hold it up. The trail led downstairs once he was finished with the job, then back upstairs halfway and back down again, creating an overlay so that in some areas the smeared blood and gore seemed wider than what the blade was. He wasn't even sure why he had attempted to go back up there. He had seen what he had done. Why witness the butchery all over again? To help them, they were beyond it. To make sure they were dead and not suffering, there was no question they were dead. His wife's head still lay on her pillow, but was detached from her body all the same. And the two girls, he didn't want to think about the two girls. He had only picked up the axe when he had lifted it above his head to take the swings. And as for the why of it all, he knew very little. Whatever had entered him, whatever it was that did this, was already gone. He knew this because he had puked it up in the girl's room after he had done what he had done. And perhaps it was because the room was dark for the most part, or maybe that was its true color. But the vomit had been thick, viscous, and black as pitch. Either way, as soon as it was out of him, he realized what he had done. That's when the tears and the guttural screams escaped his mouth, a mouth open so wide it was a wonder his lips didn't split at the corners. Before, he had been a passenger, held captive in his own mind, forced to watch himself take the weapon out of the bed of his truck, walk inside, dragging it as though it were a burden too heavy to lift. He had dragged it with the blade scraping along the asphalt, then up 3 concrete steps that led to the back door where it clinked against each one, and finally into the house. He didn't want to think about it. He prayed it was just a dream. Oh God, let it be true. Let me be dreaming. He had passed the girl's room and had gone into the room where his wife would be lying asleep. He had only a vague recollection of killing his wife first. He did recall catching a shadow of himself lifting the axe far above his head and bringing it down with tremendous force. And he didn't have to go upstairs and check on the girls. He knew they were dead as well, and that he had attacked them after Michelle. They were all dead, and there was no bringing them back. In the bedroom he and Michelle shared was a Colt Python 357 he kept tucked under the mattress on his side of the bed. Only he couldn't bring himself to go back into that room. He couldn't even bring himself to walk upstairs, down the hall where he'd have to pass his daughter's room. He had tried but was unsuccessful. He and his late wife always left the curtains pulled back so that the moonlight would shine through upon them on clear nights, and it was a clear night. He would see her there, lying in their marriage bed, bathing in the moonlight, in her white, flowery gown that he had purchased for her on last year's anniversary. Her head would be detached from her body. The image was too much, even using what little imagination he possessed. Worse still, what if she sat up? What if she sat up and picked up her head and aimed it at him in accusation? Oh, Christ, what an image. Her dead lips would part, and she would ask him why. Why did you do this to me? You son of a bitch, why? Then he would recoil in fright, only to bump into his two dead daughters who would be standing, or at least trying to stand, behind him. Their precious hair would be matted with blood. Wide open wounds would adorn their little bodies. The horror of what he had done was upon him, turning his blood into ice water and freezing his bowels. As he sat in the recliner, steadily rocking, he knew there was no power on this earth that could make him go upstairs and see what he had done. Besides, he didn't have to. Then a thought occurred to him. He really didn't have to see the carnage or ever think of it again. There was a single-shot Remington Model 812 shotgun in the closet by the front door behind him. His mind might be broken, but he was with it enough to know what must be done. Slowly, he stood and made his way to the closet by the front door. He was a large man, well over 6 feet, and broad. Handling the scattergun would be no problem. He opened the closet door and fished around through raincoats and old sweaters, back into the corner where his big right hand bumped against something solid and cold. His fingers encircled that cold barrel, a barrel that felt as cold as his blood, as cold as his soul, as cold as his wife and daughters must be by now. He pulled it out. Then with his left hand, he reached up and felt on the shelf for a box of shells he knew for a fact were there. It took a little rummaging, but he found them. Once he had his supplies, the man in the gory flannel shirt staggered over to the recliner, plopped down, and opened the breech of the shotgun. He looked for a moment into the empty bore. A light the size of a dime or nickel could be seen at the end, provided by the light of the ceiling fan above. Inside him, however, there was no light at the end of the tunnel. He shook himself out of his daze. Taking one 12-gauge low brass double-out buck shotgun shell from the box, he slid it into the bore and snapped the breech closed. It gave a satisfying heavy click. He thumbed the hammer back, leaned forward, and a whimper escaped his lips as he placed the barrel under his chin, as far back as his throat. The shotgun was tilted at an upward angle now. He pushed the trigger down with his thumb and his head exploded like a pumpkin stuffed with half a stick of dynamite. Flaps of skin that used to make up his face and flesh that used to cover his skull now lay across his shoulders. His body fell limp back into the recliner. His legs twitched a couple of times before stopping, and the box of double out buck shells fell from where they had rested on his right thigh to the carpeted floor where a couple rolled out. At first, the entity had just lain where the human had puked it up. Then it heard a loud boom, and it knew that sound. The human downstairs had taken his own life. Well, that happens sometimes. This most certainly wasn't the first for this creature that had been around since the creation of the world and even before that. It changed into the disguise it had always chosen. Just a dark spot, as flat as any surface it found itself on. From the floor of the tiny female human's room, it drifted out and down the stairs. Like liquid, it poured itself down the stairs. And once it saw that the man was truly dead, it slipped through the kitchen and out the back door. Doors were nothing for the demon. It merely slipped right underneath it. No problem. And this was only the beginning. Evil had come to Elks Grove, Kentucky, and there was no rhyme or reason why it had. It was like a bad storm carrying tornadoes in its wake, indifferent to the death and destruction it caused. No one knew the why of it, if there even was one. Some things don't require a reason. Just call it a force of nature. This was one of those things. It slipped in unseen, like a shadow in the dark, cruising along as invisible as a lost spirit with no apparent direction. It was dark that night, the night of July 22nd, darker than it had ever been or ever would be. The opalescent quarter moon was clearly visible in the star-spangled night sky, and yet still the darkness was smothering. And although his truck showed the temperature outside to be 88, with the humidity it felt more like 98. Be it that it may, Darren and Aaron Cole, identical twins at birth, though as they grew, people could tell the difference with ease. Even their hair color was a trifle off. Were quite comfortable with the AC set to 69. It was Saturday night, and it was to be the last comforting night in the town of Elks Grove, Kentucky. They were headed to Myra's, a funky little dive that served ice-cold beer and the only whiskey the two of them would drink, Jim Beam's Devil's Cut. Not that any number of bars in Elks Grove didn't serve the same. Myra's just had a cool atmosphere about it. They'd been going there for years, and Myra was also a friend of the family as well. Darren was always the one to drive because, according to him, he was 3 minutes older than Aaron, which technically made him the older sibling. Aaron knew it was a pathetic excuse, but he entertained his brother's wishes. After all, didn't all brothers and sisters the world over have something to squab about? A thing as mundane as who drove was ridiculous to Aaron, he of the peacekeeping sort. Darren, on the other hand, was more of the peacemaker, always ready to throw down when the opportunity presented itself, and it often did at Myra's, although Aaron was normally able to pull him away from the bar in time. Darren liked to take the 2-lane back road when going, even though at 10 p.m. they would have green lights all the way on Main Street. Darren swore the back road was faster. He also swore there were less cops on the back road, a long and curvy street called Chambers Road. And that was fine by Aaron, except he was the one that had inherited an imagination from their mother's side. All sorts of plausible scenarios inundated his mind: running out of gas, a flat tire, accidentally running someone down because the street lights were separated by 50 yards or more. And although his wariness was replete with much more atrocities than the ones he had been thinking about, he thought it best to shut the entire works down before he gave himself a panic attack. They both had cell phones, after all. Chambers Road was dark, yes, but not too dark due to the streetlights. The only places where darkness swallowed the road were in between those 50 yards or so. But the truck's headlights did a pretty good job of taking care of those wide spaces. They were perhaps halfway down the road when Aaron saw something. It was only a glimpse, but it was near a streetlight as well, so he was more than certain it hadn't been a shadow, due to the fact there was nothing on the side of the road he could see that would cast such an obscurity. It was a large black spot that took up the entire opposite lane. Is it a hole? He wondered. Paint? An oil spill? Shoddy patchwork done by some road crew employees that were in a big hurry to get home? The latter three of the four didn't jibe well with him on account of its surface. He had only seen it for a second or so, but he saw it well. Had it been an oil spill or paint, unless it was matte black paint, would its surface not be shiny? Yes, and from what he could tell, its surface had been flat, a matte black flat. There was no way something that flat could be patchwork either. A hole, then. Did you see that? Asked Aaron while putting a sizable dip of tobacco in his lip. He was hardly aware he was doing it. His eyes were so wide it was a wonder they didn't pop out. See what? Asked Aaron, smoking a Marlboro Smooth while keeping his eyes trained on the road. I don't know. Looked like a hole in the road. Back there, I mean. Darren shrugged. No, but I doubt if there's a hole in the road. Darkness can be deceiving, little brother. For the umpteenth time, we're twins, asshat. Just because you plopped out first, don't give you the title of older brother. Even Mom used to say so, Aaron replied. It was a tender subject for Aaron, and Darren knew it. And their late mother was a tender subject for them both. Still, he'd hurt his brother's feelings. Darren could hear as much in Aaron's slightly crackled voice. He decided to leave the big brother thing alone. It was quiet inside Myra's, hardly anyone there. And for a Saturday night, that was very odd. Of course, they had noticed as much when they pulled into the gravel lot. There was one car and one other truck. The two brothers stood at the doorway for a few beats as soon as they had stepped inside, taking stock of the place before they made their way to the bar. One man was playing a game of pool, by himself, of course, and seemed pretty upset by the outcome. Even when a ball rolled into a pocket, he cursed, as though he weren't the one that had made the shot. The other was throwing darts and appeared to be damn good. Unlike the other man, the dart thrower seemed happy when he landed a good one. Thought, oh yeah, baby. Myra herself was serving tonight. That was a rarity as well. They took a seat, but left one bar stool empty between them. They had always done that, partly because they didn't want to be too close to each other, a brother thing, but also in case a hot chick wanted to have a seat between them. It had happened before, although it obviously wasn't going to happen tonight. The Coles were rather handsome young men, although Darren was married, but that didn't mean anything to him and hadn't in a while. He always removed his wedding ring when he came to Myra's. He hated that part of himself. Well, if it isn't Myra in the flesh, Aaron said as he situated himself on the stool. Kinda dead in here, ain't it? Myra looked from Darren to Aaron. I swear, there was a day when I couldn't tell you two apart. Look at you now. Both handsome, don't get it twisted. But your hair is as black as a raven's asshole, Aaron. And you, she said, pointing two fingers at Darren, two fingers that held a long cigarette. Tendrils of smoke drifted up, slightly obscuring her face. Your hair is just as brown as a grizzly bear's ass, she said and gave a little giggle. As far as the lack of company, well, you know Roosters out on 109? She said, leaning across the bar and dropping her voice as though she were telling them a big secret. In fact, she was. But who was she in fear of hearing it with only two guests? 4 counting them. The two brothers nodded. It's nickel beer night. But don't you go running off. I still serve the coldest, and you two gents know that anything that only cost you a nickel ain't worth shit. After they had their favorite whiskey and about 3 cold beers between them, Aaron suggested they get to stepping before they got too drunk to drive. Darren, who usually protested, simply nodded. They tipped Myra and each gave her a warm, heartfelt hug. Then they made their way to the double doors. Darren still insisted on driving, and as for Aaron, he was feeling fine and didn't argue with him about it. If the man wanted to drive, let him drive. Besides, they were only 31 years old. There would be plenty of time for Aaron to drive in the future once Darren either tired of the task or Aaron finally purchased his own vehicle. Thank God they both worked at the same place and on the same shift. And Darren had never minded taking his brother anywhere he needed or wanted to go. The radio was the one thing that didn't work in the truck. So the two took to singing their own songs, as they often did once they were buzzing pretty good. They were just starting up their fifth one when Darren yelled, "Ah, damn it!" And Aaron heard a sound like a gunshot go off and felt the truck shudder violently as though they'd run over several sizable rocks. Darren slammed on the brakes and the Ford F-150 screeched to a halt, throwing up sparks from the rims as it did so. His eyes darted up to the rearview mirror where he saw roiling exhaust fumes and red brake lights. Then he turned his head around and looked out the back window. It was of no use. He couldn't see a damn thing except for the red brake lights glowing in the darkness, the exhaust fumes seemingly trapped in that red ambience. Aaron, who had remained quiet, hit the automatic window button, and as soon as the window was down, stuck his head out to see if he could get a better look. "What is it?" demanded Darren. Aaron merely shook his head. "Hell if I know. I can't see a thing." "What did you see? You were the one driving." "I don't know. It looked like a shadow or something. It was flat to the road, so I didn't think much about driving over it." The hairs on the nape of Aaron's neck stood on end. It was the spot he tried telling his brother about while they'd been on their way to Myra's. Only, to him, it had appeared to be a hole, and the way the truck had jounced when they ran over it, he still thought it was. How the front end of the truck hadn't dipped inside it was anyone's guess. Nah, man, that was that hole in the road I was telling you about when we were in the other lane, making our way to the bar, remember? We must have driven over it fast enough to clear it, but it busted all 4 tires. I'd bet my ass on that," said Aaron in a frantic voice. "I told you we should have taken the main street." "Shut up." Darren finger tapped the steering wheel a few times, thinking about what to do. Then it came to him. "Okay, get out and assess the damage. I'll grab the mag and go look at whatever that dark area on the road is that we hit. Find out what it is. I'll call AAA as well. It was as good a plan as any. When they met at the back of the truck, the parking lights and the red glow they emitted was good comfort in such darkness. Its ambience was like a shield, protecting them from anyone or anything that might be lurking around in the darkness, maybe even watching them. Amid its radiance, it was damn near impossible to see anything beyond it, though. Dark was such the night. They could see the exhaust fumes like a low-lying cloud of smoke or fog rising up around them. Darren slightly cursed himself for not turning on the emergency flashers, but the road was bereft of any traffic, so it mattered little, he supposed. Aaron walked around the truck and affirmed all tires were blown out. And not just blown out, they were shredded, as if they had run over a set of spikes. Darren was already walking in the direction of the hole, or whatever it was they had just run over. Aaron could hear the clopping of his heavy work boots as he walked further and further away from the back of the Ford. And the strange thing was, the hole, or whatever it had been, should only be about 3, maybe 6 feet away from the back of the truck. Darren had already walked at least 10. He must have. As for Aaron, he climbed back into the pickup and closed the door. He sighed as he was blasted in the face with cool AC. Darren, maglite in hand, slowly made his way towards the area of the road he imagined the hole would be, careful not to allow it to sneak up on him. But it wasn't there. Even the street lamp itself was at least 30, maybe 40 feet away, and that just wasn't possible. Still, perhaps he'd hit the brakes a little later than he thought. This made him exceptionally careful as he walked along. He had heard of people falling into holes, and it never ended well. The umbrella of light splayed out, and he could see the road plainly enough for about 10 feet or so ahead of him. He kept walking. His work boots continued their clopping on the pavement as he advanced. He had walked perhaps 30 feet or so when, yes, there, a large black space about 5 feet long and 7 feet wide. But it wasn't a hole, that was for sure. So how the hell did it cause the truck to jump up like it had? And could it be so far away from the truck? He had slammed the brakes instantly. And how could it have busted the tires like that? These were the questions that ran a loop in his mind as he closed the distance until he was almost right over the top of it. Not touching it, but right on the side of it, looking down over it. In fact, not only did it not resemble a hole, but it didn't resemble a spill either. It looked more like a shadow. Only when Darren looked up, there was nothing above that would cast such a shadow. let alone one in the rugged shape of this one. He got down on his knees and lowered the side of his face to the pavement the shadow thing wasn't touching. Yes, it was flat, like a shadow. There was only one other thing to do, and that was to test out its texture. To do that, he would have to touch it, and he wasn't so sure that was a good idea. Maybe it's a burn spot, he thought, and the thought relieved him. Only there was still the issue with his truck tires. Ah, come on, Darren. Afraid of the boogeyman from outer space? Shit. He whispered to himself and reached out his right hand. He twiddled his fingers as he cautiously moved his hand closer. Finally, his hand was directly above the outer rim of the shadow thing. He let it hover there for a moment. Then, with his courage as high as it was apt to get, he brought his hand down and touched the surface with his index and middle fingers. At first, nothing happened. It just felt like warm pavement. Then, as he went to withdraw his hand, it was like his fingers were stuck in thick tar. It even stung a little. He gave just a little pull at first. Realizing he wasn't going anywhere, he pulled harder, and the burning, stinging sensation increased. Then he pulled with a grunt as hard as he could, biting back the pain by gnashing his teeth. He fell on his bottom and took his left hand to the job. His fingertips now felt as if he were holding them to a hot stove. He was pulling hard enough to take the skin off both digits. With both arms he pulled, and he might as well have been trying to pull a semi-truck uphill. Then it happened. At first he didn't even notice it. The darkness had moved up his fingers as though the shadow was spreading, and it was. It then drifted up his hand, then his arms all the way to the elbows, and from his elbows up to his shoulders. Just when he was about to scream for his brother, it had traveled over his chest, back, neck, and into his mouth, choking off any cry for help. In a matter of seconds, it had Darren's entire body as black as the ace of spades, more like a silhouette than a person. Then the darkness that had covered his body began to run into his mouth as though somehow he was sucking it up. And once the last bit had entered his open maw, his mouth closed with such speed and authority it was a wonder he didn't crush his own teeth. There was an audible clop. Even his lips were closed so tightly they were as thin as a razor. His eyes were closed during the whole process, but when he opened them, they were onyx. 2 black orbs. Aaron was growing impatient. He kept checking in the rear view, but all he could see were those damnable red lights in the back. After a few moments, he reached over and turned the keys back and killed the engine. That helped some. Only now, without the engine running, it was quiet. It was so quiet he could hear his heart beating. He could see his brother's silhouette now, kneeling in front of whatever that dark spot was, be it a hole or a shadow. Part of him wanted to get out and walk back to where Darren was, fearing he may be in trouble. But a larger part of him wanted to stay put. Still, what if Darren had suffered a heart attack and was unable to call out for help? He silently cursed himself. He would worry over something like that. However, there was something in the air tonight he didn't much care for. Call it a warning brought to him by his Irish blood. Whatever it was, it didn't bode well. It was something ominous. A silly thought to have, especially with booze on the brain, but there it was nonetheless. Something tickled the back of his mind. A memory from when he was a kid, standing at his grandpa Cole's knees as the old man looked down at Aaron and smiled. Perhaps he'd even given him a little wink. And he had told him a story, but damned if he could recall what it was about. Only that it had been a horror story. Something about a monster that could get you no matter where you tried to run, no matter where you tried to hide. Once more, he wondered why he was thinking such macabre thoughts, entertaining such abhorrent memories. Finally, after waiting perhaps 10 minutes, he called out the window. "Are you all right back there, Darren? It's going on 12:30. Your wife's gonna shit a brick, and I have to be at work in 7 hours. We both do." Aaron had his head craned out the passenger window, his head turned back so he could see if there was any change in his brother's position. For a moment there wasn't. Then, slowly, Darren Cole rose to his feet. Somehow, he appeared bigger, taller than his usual height, which was a tad over 6 feet. Nothing to giggle about. Aaron chalked it up to the darkness. Darkness can be deceiving. Wasn't that what his brother had said? It certainly can, Aaron thought. Suddenly, Darren was walking back to the truck, but Aaron didn't like the way he was walking. Not one bit. It was a strange walk, hurried, but not wavering. And he was wavering a little when he was walking towards the dark thing in the road not 20 minutes ago. Now he walked straight as an arrow, and with a purpose Aaron didn't like too much. It was the walk of a man with a task to carry out, and by God he meant to carry it out too. The only question was, what task did Darren have in mind? Perhaps he was feeling like Aaron, a little creeped out in the middle of nowhere on this back road with 4 busted tires. Traipsing along in this kind of dark would sober up anyone. Thank God they had their cell phones. The moment that thought sprung into Aaron's head, he felt stupid for not thinking of it before. Darren had said he would call, but Aaron didn't think he did. Alcohol always lowered his IQ by several points. And AAA could have already been here, taking care of the issue. He started to fish around in his right pocket of his jeans to get his cell phone out when the driver's side door suddenly opened with a loud screech that scared the hell out of Aaron. He started, then looked over at his brother. "Good grief, man. You just scared the piss out of me," Aaron said. Darren made no reply. His face was turned away from Aaron when he had climbed into the cab, and it was turned away still when he closed the door. Only when the interior light went out did he turn his head facing forward, as if he were going to fire the truck up and drive. Busted tires be damned. But he only sat there, perfectly still, staring out the front windshield at the desolate road before them. Darren's face was but a silhouette, and if he was trying to freak his brother out, he was doing a bang-up job of it. Aaron merely sat there for a moment, waiting for his brother to do something, say something. Hell, if all he did was light a smoke, it would have made him feel 100 times better, even though he'd been harking on Darren forever to stop smoking tobacco and try vaping. But Darren would simply fire back with, "Why don't you quit dipping tobacco and try those nicotine pouches? Hypocrite." And of course, he was right. Finally, Aaron decided to say something, anything to kill the silence that made the darkness a little less daunting and foreboding, less menacing. Now, why were such words adrift around in Aaron's mind again? Why was he feeling the way he was feeling? So, it was dark outside. Darker than it had ever been, or so the news station said. But he wasn't a superstitious person. At least, not as much as most he knew. And he certainly didn't scare easily. But something was amiss. He felt it from balls to bones. Darren wasn't acting right. And if his actions, or lack thereof, had anything to do with that black spot back there, he wanted to know. "So you gonna tell me what you found back there?" asked Aaron. He hated how weak his voice sounded to his own ears, but he was scared. "Darren?" As soon as Darren turned and looked at him, Aaron immediately regretted calling on him. Darren's face was as black as pitch. His eyes appeared to have sunken in their sockets to the point all Aaron could see were two black holes, deeper and darker than the darkness that hid his face. Then, from somewhere in the middle of those black orbs, a tiny red light appeared, like a tiny candle burning from somewhere in the depths of those eyes. Aaron had never felt such hatred, such burning malice in all his life. Then Darren placed a hand on the steering wheel and began tapping it with his fingers like he sometimes did. From what little opalescent light shone in from the moon above, Aaron's eyes widened when he saw his brother's hand. It held the appearance of a dead man's hand, So pale the flesh was almost translucent, to the point he could see the bluish veins underneath the flesh. But not even that was the most unsettling part. Darren was still staring at him, mouth closed. Okay, you got me, bro. You can stop with the freak out my brother shit because you've achieved it, Aaron said, hoping his brusque tone with a dash of levity would do the trick. But suddenly, something deep within the abyss of his mind's subconscious announced to Aaron what he had suspected the moment his brother got in the truck and looked at him. He knew that the person seated beside him, behind the wheel, was not his brother. It may look like him, and it may be wearing his clothes and his cologne, but it was not Darren. Aaron supposed most brothers would have known. But twins? With twins, there was a connection. And the line that had connected Darren and Aaron had been snipped. Suddenly, Aaron's blood ran ice cold, as cold as Myra's beers, as his heart started to trip hammer, as if it would burst out of his chest at any moment. He had had a pretty good buzz not so long ago, but now he was sober as a judge. Aaron started bouncing his right knee up and down nervously. He was about to say something else when the thing disguised as his brother spoke. And it wasn't the voice of Darren. This voice was deep, guttural, demanding, demonic sounding, and it carried no accent, but it was as malevolent as hell itself. It said only two words: get out. Aaron needed no further instruction. He grappled with the door handle until he had it in his fist, then yanked it and pushed the door with his shoulder. The passenger side door flew open, and Aaron spilled out onto the pavement, where he rolled a couple of times until he was lying on his back in the grass and gravel of the shoulder. Then he watched the damnedest thing happen. The rubber on the tires, once shredded, began to pull itself together, mending themselves, and then they inflated. The passenger door slammed closed, seemingly of its own accord. The Ford roared into life and peeled out, heading in the direction of their homes, which were in the same neighborhood. Panic rose in Aaron. He lived alone, yes, but Darren was not only married, but married with two girls, one 8 and one 10. He had to get to them before Darren did. He had to. It was an imperative. It was also impossible. How could he manage something like that? Darren had sped off so fast, even the tail lights had vanished in the distance way before they should have. The dark of the night had swallowed them up. Then it occurred to him, my cell phone. My. Frantically, he reached inside his jean pocket and only felt some change and the keys to his house. His heart began to gallop in his chest. He went for his left jean pocket, but there was only his can of dip and a buck pocket knife. Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, his thoughts raced. Where was his cell phone? Where the hell was his... He cried out as loud as he could as his memory of what had happened with his cell phone that night came flooding in. You see, earlier that night, Darren had asked to look at a picture of the girl Aaron had met at their mother's funeral, of all places. Her name was Amber. Although he couldn't recall her last name, not that it made a damn bit of difference now. Here he was, out in the middle of nowhere, miles from home, still lying on his side in the thick of the night, with his crazed brother on his way to do God only knew what to his own family. That's when it occurred to Aaron about what had infected his brother, what had possessed him. Aaron didn't believe in that stuff, but there it was. He had witnessed it with his own eyes. Well, he had witnessed something, but he had felt it as much as seen it. When his brother had looked at him in the truck, Aaron could feel the malice burning off him, as though he were a demon capable of a kind of hatred mankind simply was not. The only thing to do before heading off on foot to Darren's house, expecting the absolute worst, was to walk back to the edge of the streetlight to see what the hell that black shit was that had infected his brother. It had infected him. That was the only word that seemed to fit. Possessed was another one, but they both meant the same damn thing in this situation. Aaron scrambled up to his feet and started half walking and half jogging towards the streetlight. It was a little way away, but not too far. Once he made it there, he stared down at the pavement in utter shock and confusion. There was nothing there. Nothing but pavement. The dark spot was completely gone. Gone as if it had never been there at all. What? He started to question the night, and then it hit him. You're all gone 'cause you're in my brother. You got in him somehow, you bastard, he cried, throwing his head back and then back down, where he grabbed his knees and let out a groan laced with anger and agony. He had to get to his brother. But his brother was probably already home. If not, he was halfway there. And if he hurt his wife and little girls, then the deed was over, and nothing Aaron did would ever change that. He looked up in the direction the Ford had gone. The road was just as empty as the night, faintly lit by the glow of the pale moon and the occasional streetlight. He put another dip of tobacco in his lip and started walking in the direction of the neighborhood. Maybe a car or a truck would come along and give him a ride. The way his shoulder-length black hair was all disheveled, he doubted it. He was certain he looked as nuts as his brother, or maybe even nuttier. But there was always a chance. What Darren Cole never saw before he took his 12-gauge shotgun and blew his head off was the dark stuff he'd vomited out in his daughter's room. He saw some of it, but not as it was leaving. and he didn't see it turn into something flatter, like a shadow, and glide along the carpeted floor. It headed towards the stairs, then glided down the stairs as well, moving down each riser in a liquid like motion. It moved stealthy, not too fast, but discreet. It could move fast if it wanted to. In fact, when it had come into this town, it had moved with all the swiftness of a bullet. It waited at the foot of the stairs, this large and malignant thing. Darker than a silhouette it was, but just as Darren and Aaron had said and thought, not shiny like oil or paint. It waited until Darren cocked the hammer back on the single shot shotgun and blew his hot thoughts all over the ceiling and the wall behind him before it made another move. Then and only then did it start to move towards the back door. Doors were no problem for it, being as that it was as thin to the floor it was moving across. It slipped right underneath. It whisked by the Ford F-150, the very truck that Darren had fetched the axe from. The same axe he had later used to carry out the atrocity within the Cole home. Only the quarter moon and stars saw the dark spot as it slid along. Seldom ever did it travel along roads. It had done so simply to fool two twin fools. The truth was, it hadn't completely been finished with the body of the man called Darren Cole. It had wanted to kill his brother as well. The way the man called Aaron was looking at it, with his silly face and his fish lips, it wanted to grow claws and pull the human's face right off. It could do things like that if it so chose. Just as it had grown spikes right as the truck was about to pass over it. It could have torn that silly face off as easy as pulling the mask off a trick-or-treater. Oh yes, it was wise to that too, the pagan ways of the Gentiles, their stupid rituals they lavished in every year. It was far, far older than the humans, and it would be here once they were all gone as well. But the road was too open. It could be spotted. Someone might even call the humans that wore those uniforms adorned with gold-colored things. They would come with their flashlights and their flashing blue lights atop their cars and their sirens screaming in the night. Not that it couldn't take the warbling noise those cars issued. Where it hailed from, there were much, much louder sounds than sirens or anything else on earth. And while they were no match for the entity, it chose to avoid confrontation if it could. It had a mission to carry out, a mission assigned to it from below. And so it rushed away on the ground, a black, sleek, but dim thing in motion, to a field beyond the Coles property. There were several cattle in the field it found itself in, and it was hungry. It slid under one sleeping bovine, and in an instant, the cow was devoured. Had any onlooker seen this, they would have said the cow appeared to have been sucked down into the earth, even though there was no hole left, with impossible speed at that, then explode while blood spewed in a thick shower all over the grass. What was left was simply hide, blood, and a few bones. After feasting on a few more, the cattle began to wake and complain. Their moos were growing louder, and their running about was apt to get the attention of the farmer. It left as quickly and quietly as it had come. The following day, the small, sleepy town of Elks Grove would wake up to a slaughter of the likes of which its denizens had ever seen. Newscasters from larger towns would flock to the area. Some things would be able to be explained away, while others, like the cattle, would be left up to speculation and conspiracy. As for the dark spot, it was no longer in the small town of Elks Grove, Kentucky, but just on the outskirts. For the nonce, it would have to lay low. It did so in forests and in thickets. Sooner or later, all the people who had come armed with their cameras would leave, and it would be time to finish the job. Until then, it could wait as long as necessary. After all, it had waited much, much longer for jobs that were assigned to it. It was just another task. In the meantime, it feasted on deer, cats, stray dogs. Even birds of the air were no problem. Like the cows, it would wait until one was right above it and suck it down out of the sky. It was daylight when Aaron arrived in the cul-de-sac where Darren and his family had lived for 7 years. There were news vans, squad cars, a couple of ambulances, even a fire truck. He had known he would be way too late, having to walk on foot. A man with neatly cropped hair and a clean-shaven face ran up to him, asking so many questions, Aaron didn't have time to answer one of them. Rather than ask about what happened, he turned from the slick-dressed, well-manicured man and made his way back in the direction of his own house. Maybe he would kill himself once he got there. He already knew that Darren had done it, committed suicide, so why couldn't he? And no one had told him his brother had gone by his own hand. Aaron just knew. Call it a twin thing. Just like he knew Michelle and his two precious nieces were gone from this world as well. As for the dark spot, well, he felt it was gone too, at least for the time being. Perhaps it would feel satisfied and move on to some other town. Oh God, what a horrible thought to be thinking. Though Aaron didn't really believe this. He believed it was hiding out somewhere, just waiting like a venomous snake in the weeds, waiting to strike again. Aaron didn't kill himself that day. Instead, he decided to wait for the thing to come back again. Perhaps there was a way to kill it. Only time would tell. Thank you for your time and attention and listening to one of my stories. I truly hope you enjoyed it. My hopefully someday soon loyal listener. Please hit the like and subscribe button if you would like to hear other horror stories. And seeing as how those are the only kind I write, there's a good chance you will. But once again, if you would please hit like and subscribe. It's absolutely free, and you will help the channel grow and reach a broader audience. The more that happens, the better material I'll be able to have for you. And by subscribing, you'll be sure to never miss a story. Until next time.